Welcome back, and I'm here with my friend Greg DeMarco, and I'm Don Gertz, and we're going to talk about something that we've talked about it. How we're going to have this conversation, but sometimes we wonder, are there things that we shouldn't actually talk about when we're with our clients and when we're in a sales conversation? So I think that's maybe what we should just say is are there things that we shouldn't talk about? And what would they be, and how do we avoid those pitfalls? Because I can remember in maybe several times when I said something, and I know exactly the moment I said it, and I know that I lost the sale. So, Greg, why don't you kind of start us off on this conversation?
Well, I think that you have to look at it from the point of view of what are we trying to accomplish with what we're trying to do. And the reason why I say that is because I think there are certain things in conversations that we have with clients or buyers. Let's call them buyers because that's what they are. We were hoping that they become clients. And if we're looking at that, what is it that we can and should talk about, and what should we avoid? And I kind of look at it this way. Your job is to act ethically and in keeping with your current job description. Let's just start there because this is a big topic. Keeping conversations to a professional level, I think, is an important thing. And a lot of times what I found in my experience is a buyer will take you off-roading in the conversation. And
off-roading is a good way to put it, because when you're off-roading, you don't know what you're going to run into sometimes, right?
Yeah, and that's what I mean. And you can't ignore it by any means, right? Because what are you going to say? You're just going to talk over them? You can't. So, but you can be diplomatic about it, and by basically saying, a certain thing that will help. But before I get to what you can, like, I often use this specific line that has always worked for me. No matter what the conversation topic is, this works. But I look at it this way. There's current controversial events. There's politics and religion. I try and stay away from all of it for the reason that when it comes to current controversial events or any of this, let's face the fact. The world is divided on most topics now. So if you start discussing something that falls under that category, then you risk alienating half your buyers.
You end up not knowing exactly what side of the fence you might really like the person, but they might have a viewpoint on something that's very different from yours, and you run the risk of alienating them.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Half of them. Like when you think of the cost of a buyer acquisition, what it costs to bring somebody to the table, you realize this isn't a smart decision for you or your bottom line if you're going to get into a discussion on a controversial topic. And what I always kind of say to get out of it is I say, I think it's a crazy world we live in right now with lots of ideas being thrown around. And I don't really follow it to a point where I can make a judgment on this specific topic. And we can't solve this in a few comments. So that's kind of where I stand on it. And that's how I kind of put it off. It's kind of maybe a loosey-goosey kind of a comment, but the reality is simply this. It's telling them that, good topic, we're not going to solve it. And certainly we don't have the time to talk about it in this time frame.
No, I think, to me, it goes to, what kind of relationship and how strong a relationship you might have with the person, because, there's a couple of things. I believe that in our culture today, we need to learn how, again, to talk to people.
Yeah.
And we seem to have lost the ability to have a conversation about something, to discuss something, to debate something. I mean, that's the whole purpose of a debate, is to explore and to uncover, the different truths that are in our world. And when we're not able to effectively have that debate or have that discussion, I think we're doomed to ignorance. But and it's difficult in today's world, even with people that we know well and have a good relationship with them, to have some discussions about some of the, the controversial topics, because it can, it can polarize. It can polarize the conversation very, very quickly. But so I think you got to recognize that at the beginning of a sales conversation, you don't have a deep relationship with somebody. So don't get into deep relational topics, or don't get into deep topics, topics that are controversial. It just doesn't work, but it also, I think, is important not to lose sight of who you are, because who you are, we're not saying that you need to maintain your authenticity with people, but learn how to, and I think that one of the keys is understanding where you stand on some of the topics. And if you don't have a stance on the topic, if you haven't thought it through, then that's a good way to say it. Is just, hey, I recognize that's an important topic in our world today, but I haven't really given that enough thought to actually have, to have an opinion on it. So I remember I had a client one time. It was kind of funny. He was, I asked him what he thought about a particular. We were talking about making an offer, and his wife was a very dominant type of a personality, and he was he is a really nice guy, but I asked him a question, and he says, I don't know that I have an opinion on that. I thought, sometimes that's a really good answer. I don't know that I have an opinion on that. But
and that's also a diplomatic way of sort of skirting the issue too, right?
Yeah. But you have to maintain your authenticity, as well. Because if you're not authentic with somebody, then why do they want to deal with you? But
well, that's right. And that's a really important thing you just said there, because that's true. You want to always be authentic, right?
Yeah. I think that, we talk about DISC, we talk about personality styles, and we talk about, different ways of recognizing them. But really, that's kind of our role as a salesperson, is to become a chameleon, to be a chameleon, to be authentic in ourselves, but to be a chameleon and to become the guide to help your client achieve what they want to achieve.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. No, that's exactly right. That's what the goal is, I think. And you need to keep the conversation, like, as salespeople, it's our job to take control of the conversation. When I say control, I'm not talking about being a tyrannical oppressor. I'm talking about steering the ship towards the goal. So if that means helping your client, then that's what you're doing. You're keeping it on the tracks and keeping it in a direction that makes sense. I think when you get into we all build rapport and we build a relationship, and we do that by asking some questions about the person in order to find out who they are. You can do that without having to get into a controversial topic about something. You don't want to do that. Trust me. It never ends well.
We want to, I think one of the things we want to leave at home is a judgmental attitude. Because if we judge somebody for how they think, that's not going to go very far for us building a relationship, and that's really what we want to do, is try to build a relationship with somebody and then guide them in the sale.
Yeah.
So do we want to talk about different topics that you might want to avoid, or are we going to just let people figure that out for themselves?
Well, I mean, we can certainly get into certain topics that people should avoid. I mean, I can come up with quite a few just off the top of my head, but I really think that when I say current controversial topics, those are things you want to avoid. You're talking about a polarized subjects that you just don't need to be part of.
So how do we become part of the solution? I mean, we recognize that these are difficult topics sometimes, but is there a way that we can become part of a solution to that in our world? Or, I mean, that would maybe be another topic, because right now we're talking about being a salesperson and how to navigate that. those, the hot spots or the hot topics in our world, but that would be another topic. I think a very valid thing for us to talk about, or for our society to talk about, our culture to talk about, is how do we get people back to the table where we can lay out and say, okay, this is what I think, and this is why I think it, and then this is what you think and why you think that way, and then to have a discussion about it without wanting to cut each other's throats.
Well, that's a difficult conversation in and of itself, Don, because you nailed it when in the pre-discussion that we had before we started recording. You nailed it with something you said about culture is lost art of, it's cultural, that it's become a lost art to be in a debate with somebody about certain topics. And I think that's what's happened. It's easier to shoot them down or yell them down instead of having a discussion about where people really stand. I think what's happening is people are in reactionary mode where they're absolutely certain that they're right and that they know where you stand if you don't agree with them. And that's wrong. That's just not how you and I grew up, for example. We had spirited debate and we discussed the issues. And hey, I'm open to receiving information. And if it changes my mind and it makes sense, I'd be an idiot not to, but that's just it. And I think when we talk about that, that's the problem, is that culture has changed so much and that there is no spirited debate. It's just yelling and screaming and, accusations.
Yeah, we're probably not going to be too effective at changing culture, but
it's tough. It's a tough thing to change.
Well, I think what we have to learn is we have to understand what our own psyche is, what our own tendencies are, to recognize our own tendencies and to recognize them and how they can either aid us in navigating our culture or how they might be, go against us, because if we don't recognize our own tendencies and our own thought processes, they can inadvertently, cause us grief. Like I mentioned, that there's been a couple times where I know that I said something wrong and lost a sale, and they came because I wasn't thinking about, what my tendencies were, what my biases were, because we all have a bias. We all have a frame of reference. And our bias is based partly on our past experiences. And your past experiences, are different, than my past experiences. So we can see exactly the same thing, but you're seeing it from a different perspective,
Of course,
so your perspective yields you a result, and my perspective yields a result as well. And we might not agree on what that result is, but we have to be able to, I think, acknowledge that, that there is that difference, and that that you have value as a person, and that I have value as a person. And if we stop valuing other people, if we stop valuing people, then it's easy to cancel them and to, just say, you're out of my life kind of thing. I can't talk to you, but I think when we recognize that other people have value, their opinions have value, and that we have value as well, then we can maybe start talking about things without canceling somebody. Because really, that's what a friend of mine was in. Okay, he tells a story about when he was younger. He kind of left home early in his years, and he went and joined the Australian Army. And he wasn't old enough to join the Australian Army, but I think he fudged his age or whatever. But he joined the Australian Army. But one of the things that he told me was that this was during the time of the Vietnam War. But he said the sergeants or the drill sergeants would drill into them different names. They would call the enemy different names because they tried to dehumanize them. They would try
Yeah.
to humanize them so that, when you went to war with them, you didn't feel bad about shooting them, because in your viewpoint, they weren't human. And I think that's kind of what happens, is that we have dehumanized. The people that don't agree with us, our culture is teaching us to dehumanize them so that it's easy to cancel them. And that's wrong.
Well, that's a tactic used by certain military strategists, and that's what's being adopted by a lot of these groups. And that's, I mean, that's another topic on and of itself. But that's right. That's what you're doing. You're dehumanizing somebody,
Yeah.
and that's the worst thing. But you know what? Here's something that we can loop back to. You're right. You need to be able to build a relationship with someone. And you can't build a proper relationship with somebody without understanding who they are and where they come from. And the sooner you can determine that about somebody, the sooner that you can understand where they're coming from as far as their perspective is concerned. Because as you've already said, we all enter into these things with different filters and perspectives. And I think that what we've lost somewhat as a culture is the sense of putting ourselves in the shoes of the other person, to try and really empathize with what they are feeling. And instead of dehumanizing them, we actually are humanizing somebody. We are making them visible to us in a human form. And that, my friend, is the way to get through this. But getting back to our topic of, what to say and what not to say, it's just a simple rule to avoid conversations like that, and to keep it very professional as best we can.
Yeah,
Really.
no, I agree.
So
So we have different lines here, because talking about it from a sales perspective and talking about it from a cultural perspective, we're not. I mean, obviously, you and I are salespeople. We're not sociologists, or haven't studied human behaviors to that extent, right? But we can talk about what works in the sales world, and
but
making
there's a culture there that
yeah,
you have to deal with.
yeah, and we do, in our own little, world. But if we can create peace and harmony in our world, by not, you know, um, by not disengaging with people, then I think that we've done our job as a, in helping culture. So, but anyway, I don't know if you have anything else to add to this conversation, Greg. I think that we could talk a long time on it, because I think it's an interesting topic. But ultimately, I think, just the idea is just to be careful, when you're in conversations, to avoid the hot topics of the day, and
Yeah.
they'll change. You
Yeah,
know,
and I think just being prepared beforehand that a topic might come up that your buyer raises. I've been in that situation too, Don. It's not just I've been there where I've gotten into a conversation, said something, and you can just tell by a body language, a little flick of the eye, tone of the voice, that what,
whoops.
maybe you shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, whoops.
And it's already out, and you've got to deal with it. You got to deal with the consequences, and that's just it. So avoid it. Don't get
Yeah.
into those conversations. And certainly, if you don't, you won't know them to the point where you understand where they sit. You don't know that, and it's our jobs to figure that out. But just avoid the conversation. Keep it professional, and learn about them, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I think making an assumption about where somebody sits has become very clear in the last 3 years, that that's not a good thing to do. So
Yeah, I think if there's one thing we've learned is, that's probably very true.
yeah.
But
Anyway, be
it's a good
authentic as
question.
well. We got to
Yeah,
remember to maintain your authenticity, but keep your wits about you, and don't, keep it to the topic at hand. You know, um, talking about sports, I mean, you could say, like we can joke about Montreal Canadiens being a much better organization than the Toronto Maple Leafs because they've won more Stanley Cups. But ultimately, you could throw it back in my face that Montreal hasn't done anything for the last, I don't know how long, and
Yeah.
Toronto's been one of the premier teams in the league, but so we can talk about politics, or we don't want to talk about politics. We talk about sports,
Yeah.
fairly safely,
Yeah.
but talking about politics can be dangerous. Talking about religion can be dangerous. Talking about
Yeah.
science can be dangerous. Talking about other things can be
Well,
dangerous.
you
So
just got to me, I look at it and go like, what's the purpose? Like, why am I here talking to this person? And, is it to talk about that? Like, I mean, we talk about how we build rapport with people and we want to find some kind of commonality, of course. But the problem with that is, like, I believe in finding commonality because that's part and parcel of building rapport. But the problem with it is that if you go down a rabbit hole about some topic, you get way off track on what it is you're trying to accomplish, which is to help your buyer make an informed decision.
that's right.
You're
So
not going to do
eye on the
that.
prize.
Yeah, yeah, and
Keep
you're
your
not
eye
going
on
to
the
do it.
prize.
You're not going to do it by talking about, the basketball game.
Yeah, keep your eye on the prize. That's the idea.
That's it. Keep the eye on the prize.
Yeah.
So yeah, good topic.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Greg DeMarco, and we'll look forward to meeting with you again and see what kind of interesting things we can come up to talk about. So
It's always fun, Don. We'll
it's
talk to
always
you.
good.
Okay. Ciao.